Hi, folks. Welcome to day 2 of the Conference for Law School Computing, CALIcon2021. We're starting an hour early, in case you didn't notice, because we've got a very special presentation coming up. But let me do just a little bit of what do you call it? Housekeeping. I need to share my screen. I've done that, and from the beginning. Oh, hold on. Gotta get rid of that. There we are. Oh, where are we starting shortly? Here we are. We found the button for captioning. So if you wanted to watch or read along as we're speaking and chuckle, mildly at the mispronunciations of the natural language processing AI, that's available to you. If it's on and you want to turn it off, it's in the lower, at least on my screen, lower right-hand corner. There's live transcript. You could hide or show subtitles. So very good. Videos are already being posted to YouTube. Oh my gosh, that should be youtube.com/CALI.org. But we're also linking them from the conference website. They're not quite all there. We do a little trimming. And if you were a speaker or presenter, please upload your slides to the conference website. If you have any questions or problems with that, you can email them to Elmer. Elmer probably doesn't want me to say that. No, email Elmer to find out how to do that. My very good friend and colleague Kat Moon asked me to also invite you all to participate in another event, which is taking place, I believe, on June 24th. Thorn, Rosebud. That's what the TRB stands for. I was quite ignorant and had to ask. It's going to be a longer version of some of what we're doing here at this conference, a 3-hour thing. There's work involved. You have to create a video and be prepared to discuss ideas around what has the pandemic revealed or made impossible to ignore, what good has come from it, and what have we learned that we can go on in the future. Anyhow, the website is at trbretro.com, where you can apply to participate. It's a limited a limited participant situation. Always want to thank our sponsors. Thank you so much, guys and ladies and people, for all of your support. We really appreciate it. And the presentations by the sponsors yesterday, I thought, were very informative. Today's sponsors speaking will be Procertus, and Tim Stanley is going to be here to talk about free law, the free law project. So be sure to join that during the break. There's a reception tonight. This is we start early and we're ending late. So this is the marathon day of the conference. I call it the 3 Wishes reception. It's just going to be a Zoom meeting. We get to chat. I'm not going to try to structure this in any particular way, but randomly I will be asking people what their wishes are for going forward post-pandemic. All right. Don't forget, we're hashtagging at CALIcon21. Follow CALI.org and B2. And that's all I've got to say for housekeeping. So let me introduce our folks. This session is called Closing the Law School Gap, a collaborative effort to address educational inequities through free asynchronous tools. Now, these speakers are the Law School Success Fellows. It was a project funded partially by Axis Lex. We're very grateful to them for having done that. We've been working with these folks for, wow, is it over a year now? And we plan to continue to work with them because this has been the coolest thing we've done in a while. They produced 35 CALI lessons that are not in doctrinal areas, but in meta learning areas. Anyhow, they're going to talk all about that. And let me introduce Stephen Foster from Oklahoma City University. I'm looking over at my teleprompter, which should be closer, right? Allie Robbins from CUNY School of Law, Nicole Lefton from Hofstra, Melissa Hale is here from Loyola University, Chicago, and Laura Mott also from CUNY. So folks, it's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. I'm Laura Mott. I'm at CUNY School of Law in New York City, and I will be kicking off our group's presentation today. The title of our presentation is Closing the Law School Gap, a collaborative effort to address educational inequities through free asynchronous tools. It's a real honor and it's a real pleasure to be here tonight to connect with you and share with you all. So as John mentioned, this presentation was generated from and is meant to give an overview of the CALI Law School Success Fellowship, which was a year-long pilot endeavor involving a collaboration between CALI and 7 academic support professors who came together to write CALI lessons that were focused on teaching academic skills, meaning the lessons were not keyed to a particular area of substantive doctrine and law, but rather lessons focused on like learning how to learn the law and learning how to apply the law, no matter what the rule. Fellows included folks on the call, as well as Professor Renee Allen at St. John's University School of Law and Professor Courtney Abbott-Hill at Syracuse University College of Law. So the model of the fellowship was collaborative. That's why we're coming together today in collaboration to talk to you about some of the features and highlights of the lessons that we wrote. Another reason that we thought we'd present as a group is because the lessons, although in some sense stand alone, target specific academic skills like note-taking, multiple choice, strategy, case reading, rule synthesis, and time management. There is a conceptual theme of self-reflective learning and the encouragement of students to develop new study and test-taking strategies for law school, fundamental law school performance skills. Some of those are represented in lessons like metacognition and thinking like a lawyer. All lessons were written to function as part of a greater whole, providing students with a robust repository of self-guided, self-paced instructional tutorials that in many ways simulate what it's like to meet individually with an academic support professor. And as I'll speak about later, these folks who are a key resource in connecting new law students with successful study and test-taking strategies are in short supply. So on that theme, the core guiding principle in this presentation, also in crafting the lessons, is really about access. So in line with the origins and functions of academic support itself, we firmly believe, based on years of collective teaching experience, that many students arrive on their first day of law school without a foundation for law school learning nor a support network to help them. This access to individualized, free of charge, anonymous, and stigma-less online academic skills instruction enhances equity for first-generation law students and students with less advantaged academic backgrounds. So a couple of sort of like FAQs about the lessons. When are they useful? The lessons are designed to be used in various places in the law school curriculum, including pre-orientation, orientation, as faculty identify struggling students in their first semester, or if students self-identify, or after first semester exams when students see their grades and worry that they're not getting it or not understanding what they're being asked to do. So this kind of like utility belt feature of the lessons is part of the design and follows a core academic principle, academic skills principle, which is that lessons are not keyed to a particular class or topic, but remain broadly applicable throughout the arc of the law school experience, regardless of what classes students may be in. You'll hear more about specific lesson design and pedagogical choices made by my fellow authors later in the presentation. But to properly ground the theme of today's discussion, I'll be starting us off with a very broad brush description of the history and development of academic support in the US as a diversity, equity, and inclusion instrument. And then I'll briefly describe the different iterations of academic skills resource that are presently available at US law schools to enable you to make the connection between what we do, why we do it, and how these lessons help us to do it better. Originally referred to as academic support, the nomenclature of the discipline is ever evolving. It's known as academic success or academic skills at many law schools. ASP is a shorthand acronym that this area of teaching is known by. These name changes are seen as a way to destigmatize an area of law school instruction which is quite closely associated with stigma. So now for a little bit of history. As has been true and remains true, law is one of the most exclusionary professions. As notable scholars in the area like Russell McLean have written about, the discipline of academic support itself derived from the US affirmative action policies of the 1960s, concurrent with the US civil rights movement. The civil rights era raised awareness of the lack of Black and African American attorneys in the US, with programs at major law schools springing up in the 60s to, one, increase admissions for Black students in law schools, and two, to support their academic success while traveling through the law school program. Although the admissions drive worked, retention and bar passage rates tended to be lower for many of these students due to various factors, including systemic racism, educational inequities, and disparate access to academic resources. So doctrinal professors and administrators began to step into academic support roles. Along with their full-time teaching load, departments eventually began to coalesce around these efforts as the need for such individualized instruction became more recognized. And so today, a good number of schools have at least one person wearing an ASP hat, whether that is in pre-law, academic support in the 1L year, bar support in the 3L or 4L year, or a combination of kind of all of those things. So what is ASP and what do we do? Our discipline, and from which these lessons spring, is one that was designed to close the law school gap between students entering school from educationally marginalized backgrounds without the access to academic resources which benefited their more privileged applicant counterparts. So our roots are firmly in diversity, equity, and inclusion, even as we do today help students all across the GPA spectrum, including folks who are used to being above average and with the challenges of law school are performing at lower levels relative to their peers than they're used to. So we support students at each step of their law school journey. As I said before, typical academic support classes and workshops include topics like note-taking, case briefing, outlining, multiple choice strategy, legal analysis, IRAC. Sometimes there's credit attached to these courses, sometimes there's not, and if resources permit, we have individual meetings with students as well. Resources don't always permit, though. Some schools still have no academic support department, and for those that do, staffing runs along a huge continuum. So ultimately, on any academic support team, we're utility players who do bar support during bar season. We may flip to pre-law during the late summer, then into 1L support in the fall semester. So while each school has a different system, what remains true throughout all of ASP is that we all strive to make sure that students not only succeed and reach their full potential, but feel included in the law school community. So the reason that ASP is necessary for diversity, equity, and inclusion at US law schools, one of the main reasons is that it's a safe, low-stakes resource for struggling students. It increases retention and bar passage for folks from less advantaged academic backgrounds. Academic support also gives opportunities for students that enter law school with lower indicators, so like LSAT or undergraduate GPA, and allows them to reach out to a person who isn't their doctrinal professor, who isn't their dean, but who still has expert knowledge to help them succeed in class. Academic support can also counteract imposter phenomenon, the effects of which can be really debilitating and long-lasting. The psychological dynamics at play in US law schools can be toxic, with the stereotype, threat, and microaggressions for BIPOC students and students of non-traditional age, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, education, and those less abled. So self-doubt, anxiety, and isolation are really common for folks that are experiencing imposter phenomenon. So to counteract these forces, academic support resources are designed to help students with a range of different learning styles. Forms community in social learning spaces that's outside the doctrinal classroom. So speaking of classrooms, like when we say what we do and why we do it, we're usually talking about doing it in the physical classroom. But since the pandemic, we've shifted to mostly online. So that's another place where the academic success CALI lessons kind of come in. The online lessons are super helpful for, I think, the point that we've been at over the past year, and also that we remain at. They're free, they're asynchronous, They're anonymous tools that students can access at any time they want. So we've seen that like online learning, remote learning, hybrid learning disadvantages students with other responsibilities and less means to support a digital learning environment. With like unpredictable scheduling, heavier family care demands, all of the different things that we've all seen as we've been teaching over the year kind of leads to that conclusion. And so the lessons are a low stakes anonymous forum to practice your skills in at any time that you may like. And the economic implications of the pandemic hold real potential to widen the gap that we've been, as academic support professors, trying to close. So, you know, the CALI academic support lessons represent kind of an evolution of a discipline rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a way to learn how to learn the law with the addition of this future-oriented remote digital learning lens. So now, you know, with that, I'll pass it over to Melissa to talk about how her school's pre-law summer program incorporates academic skills instruction in these lessons, particularly for first-gen students, and why this is so important. So Melissa, it's all you.
Thanks, Laura. So a few things. When I joined this fellowship, I will admit it was for a very selfish reason that I wanted to work with these amazing people. And as Laura mentioned, different schools have different setups for academic support. Some of us are teams of one, and some schools have teams of 0. And being a team of one myself, I was really excited to find ways and create these lessons that I could reach more students without overstretching my bandwidth. And so I kind of went into the fellowship with this in mind. I also went into the fellowship with something else in mind, which I think a lot of my co-presenters would agree with, that I really wanted to create something that could benefit students that Laura was talking about. Specifically, I was a first generation law student and college student, and literally was entering law school my first year going, what is a tort? I know baking, but I don't think they have an entire law school class devoted to, you know, the law of cakes, but what is this tort thing? The language was very unfamiliar to me. The culture was unfamiliar to me. And I had this sneaking suspicion, as Laura mentions, imposter phenomenon, that everyone around me sort of had someone in their family that was a lawyer or a judge. And I later found out that wasn't true, but I just sort of walked in with the idea that I was the only one that had no idea what a tort was. I was the only one that didn't have a family member I could call. And I really, as an ASP person, want to make sure my students realize that they're not alone if they feel like that. And if they do feel like that, there are resources available for them. Laura mentioned imposter phenomenon. We use phenomenon instead of syndrome with imposter syndrome because it's not really a syndrome. It's not really an illness. It is a cultural phenomenon where people don't feel that they belong where they are, or they don't feel their success is warranted. And this happens with everybody to a certain degree, but especially first generation students who just get the impression that because they might not understand the language right away, that they're maybe in the wrong spot. And so a lot of us, I think, dove into these lessons wanting to create something that would help those students. It should also be noted that as we talk about diversity and inclusion with our students, and that being, you know, kind of the starting point of ASP, there are economic disparities there that I think are probably obvious to a lot of people, but especially for first generation students, which can overlap with a lot of other diverse groups, there are often huge economic disparities in terms of what resources they can access. This often starts with taking the LSAT in the summer before law school, where they don't have extra money for prep courses or, you know, things that people that come from a legal background or a family of lawyers might have access to. So this is where the fellowship kind of started to bridge that gap or close that gap. So a lot of our lessons sort of deal with things that help students understand that language, that culture, make them feel like they kind of have a step up before they even step into orientation. So something I started doing, because I'm only one person, is I started requiring CALI lessons for students that were incoming to Loyola prior to orientation. And we've only had 1 year of this so far because we had to create the lesson. So I think last summer was the first year that they were sort of all ready to go. And I found great success with that. What I did was I was able to send them, as long as they were admitted with a Loyola email, they can access our CALI code that Loyola uses at orientation. So I sent them a letter with that code, as well as some lesson links. And if you're at CALIcon, you probably know what that is. John can further explain it if you don't, but I kind of assume that if you're someone that comes to CALIcon, you have that working knowledge. So I sent the lesson links out to them with a handful of lessons, not all of them. I didn't want to overwhelm them with 35, but I wanted to give them a starting point of something that they could use and give them sort of just a feeling of confidence upon entering orientation. This also makes them feel like they're caught up instead of missing the memo. You know, I found psychologically, I also advise the first gen student group at Loyola. And the informal feedback I got from those first gen students in that group is that they did not feel like they missed the memo. And, you know, they were able to do these lessons and get that feeling. So on just a practical level, some lessons that I sent that they found very helpful. We have one on just what is common law. I think all of us who teach the law often forget that these incoming first years, especially if they've had no access to lawyers in their life or the legal field, they forget things that we take for granted and find very basic, such as what is common law and what is the expectation, how much are you expected to know before you enter, or just what is a case. So we have lessons on kind of reading a case. Now, you know, often they're lumped together at orientation with reading and briefing, but let's take a step back and talk about what is a case, why do we read it as lawyers and law students? And we have one great lesson, and I'm forgetting right now, if one of you wrote it, please chime in because it's one of my favorites and I can't picture the face of who goes with the lesson, but it's taking facts out of cases. So I know students often struggle with thinking, I'm reading this case, what am I reading it for? What should I get out of it? And the lesson kind of helps direct them to, you're reading this, here's what you should be taking away. Here are how you distinguish the important facts from other things, and here's how you should kind of be using it to prep for class. I created a lesson called Thinking Like a Lawyer, because I found during orientation, a lot of my students are told that you will learn to think like a lawyer, and no one tells them what that means or why lawyers might think differently. And I sort of brought it down to a level of, let's literally compare apples and oranges and how they might be similar, how they might be different, and kind of started to build that up into what we do with cases and rule synthesis. And then, as Laura mentioned, this was a collaborative effort. We all worked together to make sure our lessons were not identical, but kind of had a theme among them. And so Courtney, who is not on this call, kind of took over where my Thinking Like a Lawyer lesson ended and did one on rule synthesis and analysis, which we kept a food theme. So your students, if they're hungry while they're eating it, they're going to be vastly disappointed. But we started to do things like, is a hot dog a sandwich? Like if you have a rule about what a sandwich is, does a hot dog fit in there? And so they didn't feel intimidated by having to rule synthesize with civil procedure or a class that they didn't know or was a completely foreign language. Courtney literally took restaurant reviews of sandwiches and said, let's make a rule about what is a sandwich. What can we tell from these restaurant reviews? We all have eaten sandwiches, unlike dealing with civil procedure. So this is a comforting kind of introduction where they don't feel so overwhelmed. And so these kind of things, I'm going to continue to do it. I'm doing it again this summer and giving them access to those lessons and making sure that they get that familiarity before they even step into orientation to try to really combat that imposter phenomenon. And like Laura said, to close the gap between some of our underperforming students and some of the students who are already confident. It should be noted that I don't target students. It's required for everyone. And as Laura mentioned, there's a lot of stigma sometimes associated with what we do. And so I'm always trying to be aware of that stigma. So when these lessons go out, they're required for everybody. I don't say they're just required for first gen or they're just required if you have a certain LSAT or GPA. It's the whole incoming class to try to put them on the same exact playing field And then they all know that going in, that no one had information that others didn't. And with that, I believe I'm turning it over to Nicole.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole Lefton. I'm Director of Academic Success and Bar Prep at Hofstra's Law School, the Maurice A. Dean School of Law. And you know, thinking back, we had such a wonderful and interesting time putting all of these different segments and different lessons together. And when we all sat down at the very beginning and we were sort of coming up with our plan, which lessons did, you know, each of us want to create, you know, I found myself sort of thinking very compartmentally, you know, do I want to write something about, you know, multiple choice test taking strategies or essay writing strategies or answering, you know, performance test questions or things like that. And, you know, we were sort of over time, I was thinking back on where do I see, you know, where would I start? Where does this start? And I come from a test prep background. I worked for actually a Barview company building online test prep courses. And so I come from the background of asynchronous, some synchronous, but asynchronous and online learning. And I was trying to kind of fit that in, but I realized at the end of the day, I guess the place where I see students starting is through an understanding of how they learn, how they're doing, basically, in a nutshell. And you know, I can't count, and I'm sure we all are in the same boat, how many students have come into my office and said, you know, I stink at torts, or I'm terrible at multiple choice questions, or I can't write essays. And you know, those are such broad brush descriptions of strengths and weaknesses, or I just said weaknesses, that I think it really sort of got me thinking about how do we help students really understand, because you can't stink at multiple choice questions. I mean, you may not like answering them, but there are going to be parts of answering a multiple choice question, any given question, that you can excel at, and areas where you need to develop your skills. So it sort of got back to thinking about, I guess, what I was thinking about, the root of the struggle, and that got to the big, you know, word that's sort of the new CAL, metacognition. I don't know if CAL is the good example anymore. Maybe that's old, but metacognition. And what is metacognition? It's really sort of the ability or the understanding or the ability to analyze and understand how you learn, how you struggle in your learning, where you can improve in your learning, and how to sort of learn how to learn better, I guess, in a weird way. And we can all improve this, right? I think we all look through our own strengths and weaknesses through a different lens. And sometimes you can talk to somebody about it and they don't quite get it, but through a variety of exercises and things, I think you can really help people become better learners. And that was actually the first lesson that I created, was on metacognition. And it started with probably the most basic area where I see students, particularly first year law students, particularly students who came straight from college to law school or have been out of school for a long time. I guess that basically, you know, covers almost everybody, which is they don't even know how to sort of organize their time. So metacognition starts with just the understanding of the time commitment and the organization of that time to be able to excel at law school. So the one of the first parts of my lesson really has students working on building a schedule and figuring out how to build a schedule. And your schedule may look completely different from my schedule because you have other stuff going on in your life. And I think this is particularly valuable to students who over the past year were all remote. Students who may have other things going on in their lives, from family commitments to jobs to taking care of elderly family members and supporting other people, and trying to understand, you know, I can give you a schedule and say, oh, you know, work on your, you know, your torts homework from, you know, 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock, but you may not be able to do that because you may actually have to go and, you know, and work in your parents' business from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, and that's not going to work. So the whole idea of metacognition I found particularly interesting and particularly valuable as I tried to really help students evaluate and improve how they learned, starting from sort of organization of the time that they spent working on the learning, but even getting into individual skills and then assessment of those skills. This is certainly by no means a bash on the doctrinal professors, but I think we've all been there, right? We all went through law school, and I think back in the day when I was in law school, I never went to a professor for critique or for follow-up. I just didn't do it. I think our students are better at that now, but in light of the past year where everybody was so isolated, I think it still is really difficult to get that kind of feedback, formative feedback throughout the process. There are now, ABA requirements that there are certainly more formative assessments throughout law school, which is a great step, I think, for many schools that didn't have that before, that really just gave summative final exams, where all of a sudden the student wakes up and says, oh, wait a minute, I thought I knew crim, but I got a D. How did that happen? But even with the formative assessments in place and the feedback from professors, I still think that there's room to help students understand how to interpret that feedback, how to interpret the results of their work, so that they can learn and improve, and the areas where they're strong, they don't go and throw that out while they're working on improving an area where they are struggling. So I think that was like such a great place, at least in my mind, for students to start before they sort of worked on some of the lessons that we all did that were a bit more discrete and a bit more specific in specific areas. Stephen did a fantastic lesson on multiple choice questions. And I sort of did a follow-up to that one, which I thought was it wouldn't have worked as well without his lesson. But I think, we have different lessons. Some people did, just on issue spotting and just on rule analysis and just on application of facts to rules. And all of those different pieces are so valuable. But at the end of the day, I like the idea of sort of stepping back and saying, before you even get started with that, how can you improve how you use that stuff, how you use the materials that we're giving you, that your professors are giving you, that are out there elsewhere. And so I guess that was really sort of my spiel. And next I'm gonna pass it over to Allie.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. As you heard, my name is Allie Robbins. I work at CUNY School of Law. And just to pick up on what Nicole was saying, one of the really unique things about these lessons is that students can do them on their own time. When they have the space to do it, they can do them as many times as they want to do them. That way, we're really meeting students where they're at, right? So we have limited time and resources for when we can do our academic support sessions, when different things are available. But in terms of these lessons, right, students can do them when they want to, as many times as they want to. Nobody's going to sort of critique how well they did or didn't do, right? And so it really is as accessible as is possible, right? And for CALI member schools, it's all free, and they can keep doing them, and they can go back to them. And maybe in their second year, they still want to do the what is common law lesson because they're still not quite sure, right? Or maybe they didn't fully get IRAC, so they're going to do that lesson. So it's really a way to meet students where they are. And to provide access to students who may not have a great, robust team of academic support professionals at their school, may feel embarrassed about accessing them, may not know what resources are out there, right? So if we can get them those lessons, we can give people a leg up from the beginning, right? To sort of, not really even a leg up, right? But even the playing field from the beginning, but then give them that resource that they can keep going back to and keep learning from and keep exploring more. We have a ton of lessons, so no student is going to just go through all of them, right? There are, I think, 35 of them. But they can do that over the course of their law school career. But one of the things that academic support professionals focus on, in addition to metacognition, right, and in addition to the specific skills that we talked about, like note-taking and outlining and IRAC, case reading and briefing, right, is this idea of transfer, the idea of connecting something that you know to something that you're just learning, right? It helps you understand it better. And we are training lawyers who need to go out there and understand the legal system generally, right? To understand how the law works, to understand how the court system works, to understand how how the entire justice system works, right? And so if we can get students from the beginning to understand that what they're learning in a particular class is not isolated to that class, they will be better off in law school and they will be better off as lawyers. And even just looking at the syllabus of our lessons, provides a window into that, right? Because you can see that no matter what class I'm in, I need to think about outlining and note taking and case reading and briefing. No matter what class I'm in, I need to think about legal analysis and how I'm going to approach a particular problem. And so I think our whole syllabus does that globally, right? It meets that critical need of teaching students that they can transfer knowledge from class to class and doctrine to doctrine, that they can transfer academic skills from class to class and doctrine to doctrine, and that they can transfer lawyering skills from situation to situation, right? And I also happen to write a specific lesson about transfer to introduce students to this concept, right? Because law students often see each course and each interaction as totally separate from one another, right? This professor wants me to do this, that professor wants me to do something totally different. And that's not really true, right? For the most part, we're teaching you about this one legal system, and there may be differences in criminal law versus torts or contracts versus civil procedure, but at the end of the day, your teachers all want you to do legal analysis, right? And so hopefully our lessons, by using examples from various doctrines, by also bringing in examples from regular life, like baking, as Melissa was talking about, right, or dance or what have you, it can allow students to see these concepts that they're learning as broader, as not just about that specific thing that they need on that day for that professor, but as a larger part of the legal system and as a larger part of building their skills in legal analysis. And we hope that this will carry with them into practice, right? Because as you know, lawyers are lifelong learners, right? No case is exactly like another one. And our graduates are going to enter jobs and be expected to teach themselves a great deal, right? So having these skills of metacognition, of the growth mindset, as was mentioned in the chat, of transfer, will really help them long term, right? And so by providing them with these lessons and exposing them to the idea of transfer early on, we give students a better opportunity to practice these skills throughout law school, so that they can really think about, how is what I'm learning today connected to what I learned yesterday or last semester or last year. And so, you know, as some examples, right, in terms of lawyering skills, right, in terms of approaching solving client problems, right, you're going to do things in a certain way, right? You might conduct legal research in a certain pattern, no matter what question you're researching, right? You might conduct interviews in the same way. You know, you'll have different questions, but you need to come up with your interview plan, right? Figure out what kind of template works for you. How do you approach the client in that moment? How do you reflect on that and improve your process for the future, right? So whatever you're doing, you won't do exactly the same thing in another context, but you're going to be building on your skills and transferring from those skills. You know, in terms of doctrine, right? The reasonable person is used across number of doctrines, right? Criminal law, contracts, torts, foreclosure. You might see that in a property class, in a real estate class, in a secure transactions or UCC Article 9 class, right? So giving students examples of this in our lessons allows them to be thinking bigger picture about what they're learning, which ultimately will help them be empowered to see, oh yeah, I can do this legal analysis, right? I can figure out how to solve this problem. This law may be new to me, but it's similar to something else that I know about, and I can use a similar process to figure out how to work through this problem. You know, and similarly with academic skills, right? So if I'm supposed to interpret a particular piece of legal text, right, what am I going to do? What steps am I going to take? Or if I have an exam coming up, on something that I'm not feeling super comfortable with, right? What are the steps that I'm going to take to figure out how to study, right? How do I create my study materials? How do I memorize those study materials? How do I do practice hypos? How do I ultimately take that exam? And then what do I do after that exam, right? How do I review it? How do I get the feedback on it? How do I do a self-assessment? How do I get feedback from others, right? We have lessons on all of that, which will help students globally throughout their time in law school, and then ultimately throughout their time as lawyers. And so, you know, one way, so I think our lessons do a great job of illustrating that. I think just pointing it out that there is a lesson on transfer, and making students cognizant of the benefits of transferring their knowledge and their skills from class to class from the start of law school can be really helpful. And then also, you know, encouraging faculty to just raise issues, right? This is like something you may have learned in another class. And even going as far as assigning a learning journal, right? One way that can be really helpful for students to do this transfer is to keep a journal for themselves, right? what am I doing? How have things been going in my classes, right? This is again key to that growth mindset and you know, keeping students reflecting all the time on what they're doing, what their process is, what's working, what's not working, how can I improve, right? And keeping a learning journal can also help with the transfer, right? This professor said this. This sounds similar to something another professor said. Is that because the law is similar here? Is that because they're asking me to do a similar thing on my exam? You know, and you can have, for faculty, you know, you can have guided questions for those learning journals, or you can keep them open-ended. But it is something that I know helped me in law school. Somebody suggested that my first year, and it certainly helped me to kind of step back for a moment and think a little bit bigger picture about what I was doing in my first year. And our lessons, even without that faculty input, right? Our lessons are there to help students do that, to help students say, all right, I'm not so sure about this concept, or I'm struggling in this way. Let me go do this lesson, right? It'll take me 20 minutes or 45 minutes, depending on the lesson. And I'll have a better understanding, a better idea of what my professors are looking for. And ultimately, right, in order to make sure that our law students can succeed, that they know the things that we assume as faculty they know, but that they might not actually know, right? These lessons provide an incredible syllabus to all the things that your professors think that you're doing and knowing, right? And all of the things that academic support professionals really try to work on, right? And try to do in individual meetings, in group settings, through workshops, right? But we can't always reach every student to the extent that we want to. We're not in every school. And we can't always meet students at the times they need, right? And so that's why having these lessons that they can do whenever, wherever is super valuable. And so now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Stephen, who's going to talk about that, recreate kind of how we try to translate what we do in person individually into our lessons.
Yeah, thank you, Allie. As Allie said, my name is Stephen Foster, and I'm the Director of Academic Achievement at Oklahoma City University School of Law. And the fellowship for me was important because of that recreation of the individual meeting. As Laura and Melissa said earlier, like, we have students who are entering law school with unique challenges. We're trying to increase diversity within our law schools. We're trying to bridge that economic gap, try to help those first generation students. And as academic support professionals, the best way to do that in general is individual meetings. Well, with both kind of the pandemic over the last 18 months and just resources in general, we can't do that for every student. Maybe there are some schools that can. That's definitely not any of our law schools. And so for me, I was trying to think through the process of what can I do to help those students who aren't in my office? Because as most of us know, the students who I worry about the most are the ones that I don't see. And what is it that I can do to help them? And so I want to give you all just a little bit of background on both my and kind of the fellowship's process on recreating that individual meeting to meet the students where they are. So for me, and like I said, for most of us, when we were creating the lessons, we did it similar to a class. I sat down and said, all right, here's the lesson I'm creating. What are my objectives? By the end of the lesson, what is it that I want the students to walk out with? Like, that's normal. That's what I would normally do for any of my classes, listed out my objectives. Then my next step was just creating the base. And that's what you would do for most of your classes. For a class where you have PowerPoint, you create your deck of PowerPoint slides, what your base is, or what is going to be your questions. This is where I included the instruction. I had questions for each of the skills. I created, as I said earlier, a lesson on MBE test taking skills. I wanted them to be able to go through a certain number of steps. So I wanted them to understand and be able to do those when they walked out. And then I created instruction slides and then question slides to walk through that. And that's normal. That's something that we would all do. That's things that we would do both in individual meetings and in our classrooms. But I think the CALI lessons and this project is important because of what happens next. After that, we all then started thinking about branching. And branching is this idea that most of you all have experienced kind of in test taking in general, but it's the idea that if a student answers a question a certain way, they should probably get a different set of instructions. And that's what the individual meeting does. If a student's sitting in my office and they say, I ask them a question and they give an answer, I'm going to follow that up in a different way than if a student answers differently. just like in class. Socratic dialogue is kind of this flexible, dialogue that is fluid, that kind of changes based on the student answers. That's sometimes difficult when you're looking at kind of this asynchronous program. Well, we were able to do it by this idea of branching. And what happens is, for each one of my questions, I kind of went through a quick 3-step process. If I'm talking about multiple choice test taking, I think first, what's a common mistake that a student's going to make? Like if we're talking about facts, they're going to read the facts too fast and they're going to miss something. Then my second step was, let's put a wrong answer in my question that is part of that common mistake for case briefing. I know that students are going to create holdings that are either too broad or too narrow. So some of my answer choices are going to be holdings that are too broad and too narrow. Like I want them to make mistakes. And we all know that through formative assessment. That's how students learn. They hate it. We love it, right? We want them to miss the questions. And so those were my first 2 steps. Like, what do I see? What are they going to pick, and put those in there? And then the next part, which is the difficult part, is then when they pick that answer, we take them to a different question. And we take them, it doesn't have to be another MBE question. It could be a fact pattern where it's a fill in the blank where they have to pick out the nuanced fact. And it really was all right, I know this is a common mistake. I know what you're going to do. Let's take you to a question that really delves into that mistake. Now we're creating skills lessons. So sometimes the mistake might have been doctrinal, and you can kind of figure that out, or you can give them the rules to try to make sure that that's not the mistake that they're making, because we don't really want to worry about the doctrine. And that's why Melissa does an excellent job in her lessons of using baking and food and all of that to kind of take us out of that. But I think that it's that process that really helps recreate that individual meeting. Now, to be fair, we don't do that on every single question. It would make the lessons functionally unmanageable. But it was a very intentional effort for all of us to figure out not just how do I teach this, how do I make sure that they don't go down the wrong path and kind of take them back to what they're supposed to learn. And we all went through that process. Now, again, there are problems. One is, how do I predict what the students are going to do? Some of that is we just have a group of fellows who have been doing academic support forever. I can't tell you the combined number of years we've done it. It's a lot. And so there's a little bit of, we're able to predict some of based on what we've seen. And maybe it isn't perfect because we are trying to make some of these predictions. You do have to balance kind of how much branching you use versus going on with the lesson. And there's some difficulty there. But fundamentally, I think what we've all said is true, is that we have to bridge this gap. There are students who need these skills, and there are students who aren't showing up in our office. And what are we going to do for that? And this fellowship is intended to kind of provide them with resources so that they can learn the skills. And one of the ways that we recreate kind of the individual meeting that we would normally have that interaction is kind of through this idea of branching. Thank you all. I know that I'm speaking for myself, but I'm sure that the co-panelists would also say thank you very much. It is an honor for us to be able to present this to you. We really hope that you all will use the lessons. If you have any questions, Melissa already shared, her letter, any resources that we can give or tell you what lessons that we use, just let us know. We're more than happy to help out in any way we can.
Oh, we're not going to let you go that fast. I've got lots of excellent questions being slacked to me, and ones that I've come up with myself. And this is, first of all, thank you for that presentation. That was great. All right, I'm going to try to think. You actually touched on the one I really wanted to ask, which was to talk about interactivity. So I'm going to go to a different one here. What about smart students? Is there anything there for the student who is already succeeding in law school or thinks they already know everything? And the stigma of, I don't have to do that stuff. That's basic stuff.
I will take this very quickly and then let my other panelists jump in. I think Stephen and Allie both mentioned that I like to use dance as an example. And I think even sort of the prima ballerina goes back to basic bar work. So for you fellow dancers out there, that makes sense, but put in whatever sport you want to use. Even the people at the top of their game have to go back to basics and really drill those skills down. And so these are an opportunity for those strong students to do that. There are also lessons, I think, on things like growth mindset, as well as metacognition, that even the better students don't think about. We also did a couple different lessons on analyzing your own work and kind of self-assessing after you do a midterm and after you do a semester, that I think even strong students can still benefit from, because I don't know that even our strongest students, I think, sometimes lack in those areas.
Very good, very good. You know, I really want to get this question in, so I'll push it to my top. I heard you guys talking about this sort of behind the what's the word? The message behind your message. Has law school changed so much from? I mean, did it used to be we will tell you what to study and we will tell you what to regurgitate at the final, to, you know, here's this a buffet of stuff you have to learn. There will be a test. And we're putting a lot more responsibility on the students to figure out what their educational journey looks like to get through law school.
I mean, I'll briefly try to answer. I think law school was always like that. I think law school is probably better than it used to be. Like, they used to really hide the ball, and maybe not quite as much anymore, but there still is a significant amount of you need to put it together in the end. And there are many doctrinal professors that kind of help through kind of not necessarily outlining, but kind of synthesizing the doctrine and asking about how it applies to previous cases or doing more formative assessment. But I mean, you have to remember that in an hour and 15-minute class, a doctrinal professor is both trying to cover what the case is, what it means, and then trying to put some of that together for students. There's just not enough time, and then cover a reasonable amount of material. So there still is a significant responsibility for a student outside of class to handle their own learning. And so I think that these are important because it guides them through that process, especially for first generation students or students with different educational backgrounds. I have many students in my office who say, I never knew how to study before I came in. I'm like, awesome. Like, that's a lot of people, right? I mean, that's not just you. And I try to make them feel better when I say that. It's like, but you know, we have lots of, as the chat just said, all of our students are smart. They absolutely are, right? Like, you don't make it to law school unless you're a good student. And many times they were able to do that with inefficient learning. And so I think that a lot of what we're trying to do is to take these people who are very smart, who have many really good skills, and try to help them hone them in a way and apply those to the law school environment, which is better. But there's absolutely still a significant amount of you've got to figure out how to learn on your own, and everyone learns differently. And so we try to put together, you know, a range of lessons, and we'll continue to do, and excited to continue with putting together these lessons to help students.
Laura?
And I'll just jump in. I think both questions are related to each other. Students, you know, even students that have typically identified themselves as being strong students have deficiencies in some other areas that maybe students who haven't identified as being strong don't. And when you combine that differential with the inherent differential of teachers teach differently, right? Like, you have to learn a set of skills that will enable you to extract what you need from the lecture and from the materials in class from teachers with different teaching styles. So I think with respect to these lessons, I think a lot of them kind of get to that skill set.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to take inspiration from our keynote yesterday, and also a little forward thinking, because we want to do more of this with you. Should we be creating a collection of videos, simple videos that cover the exact same content or cover it in a different way? Is there different? I won't say better. I'll say different. Maybe better for some student modalities here for this. I'll leave it at that.
I mean, I can take that. I think we can always create videos, right? Like, we all can talk forever or in short bursts about all this stuff, right? Because we live and breathe it. And so I do think there's some benefit in, all right, well, I don't have 45 minutes to sit down and go through an IRAC lesson, but I have 3 minutes, or on my commute, I have 7 minutes to listen to a video, right? Or to watch a video or listen to a podcast, right? So one of the other kind of key tenets of academic support is repetition, right? Is repetition and giving and providing information to students in different modalities. So, you know, we could do a video. I don't think it replaces a lesson, but it can certainly introduce or supplement or give a kind of a piece of it, right? So that students, again, you know, can get information that maybe they can't get in other ways, or they're not fully understanding from other ways, right? That might, you know, be an intro that would lead into something, or might refine a point that we really want to hone in on. But there is something uniquely valuable about the interactive nature of the CALI lessons, and the way, you know, Stephen was talking about the branching, right? That like you're figuring out, you're being active in that learning, right? If you're passively watching a video, you're not being active in your learning, so it's not going to be as beneficial. But there are certainly, you know, super important tidbits and things that we can share that might entice a student to go do a longer lesson, or that maybe people can fit in at other times in their busy lives.
All right. How do we not overwhelm students? I got to believe every school is thinking, great, more stuff to shovel at them, you know, and every instructor, of course, is worried if I give them too much, then another class suffers. You know, everybody studying suffers the week the paper is due. You know, to people who are afraid of telling students, in order to do better in law school, you need to learn more about your learning. It might seem like a pile on. How do we not overwhelm, I guess, is my question.
So again, sorry, if somebody else wants to jump in, they can, but I'll try to answer that with a couple of different hats on, right? So one is, I'm currently the interim academic dean at CUNY Law. And so I would say collaboration is the key, not to overwhelm, right? Knowing what's going on in the other classes that students are taking, trying not to pile on too many formative assessments at the same time they have other formative assessments, is really key, right? As academic support people and as non-academic support professors, right? Trying to collaborate so that students don't have 5 different deadlines or five different assignments due on the same day, right? That can be really important, that collaboration. But also, again, right, reminding students of why we have these lessons available and that they can access them whenever and wherever, right, helps to kind of lessen that overwhelm, right? We're not saying you have to do all of this, all 35 lessons during orientation, or all of this during, you know, your first week of classes, right? It's, here's kind of when we think you should be doing different pieces of this. This is when they can be helpful, and they're meant to supplement and support the work that you're doing in your classes. And they're not that long, right? So you can get, you know, sort of bite-sized pieces that will then make the rest of what you're doing easier, right? If you go through the outlining lesson, it's going to make outlining for all of your classes take less time, because you're going to understand what your goal is and what a good process is, right? So I think it's a matter of collaborating with others and kind of reinforcing what the purpose of these lessons is and how it will save you time in the long run.
That was great. Thank you. All right, I'm done with my questions. We've gone a little bit over time. Actually, we've done exactly 1 hour. What we're going to do is take a 10-minute break. This webinar is actually not going to stop or end, so you can keep it running. And when we come back at 1:10 or a little bit after that, we're going to start with Sara. Well, Sara Smith, who's going to be talking about CALI author, and then we have our law school research revisor fellows. Our legal research revisor fellows to talk about that project, and Elmer to talk about some new things that are on the CALI website. This is all to say how the sausage is made that you just heard about for the last hour. All right. So thank you all very much. That was fantastic. We'll see you all back here in 10 minutes. Oh yeah. All right, let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for attending CALIcon. This is our first of 3 clusters of sessions. Today, we've got Sara Smith, who's going to be talking about modifying CALI lessons with the new web-based CALI Author platform. She's the Assistant Director of Curriculum Development here at CALI. CALI Author is our own in-house built tool written by mostly by Sam Goshorn, who's been with CALI for a long time and who has lived through the writing and rewriting of authoring systems uncounted number of times. Anyhow, one of the cool things about CALI Author, which Sara will get into in depth, is that basically we let faculty clone lessons and republish them back to your students. And this has been something that we've been working towards for a long time to make that as easy as possible. And I'm doing Sara's presentation. Stop, John. So Sara, go ahead.
All right, thanks, John. Go ahead and share my screen. All right, as John mentioned, my name is Sara Smith. I'm the Assistant Director of Curriculum Development at CALI. And today I'm going to be talking about modifying CALI lessons with the new web-based CALI Author program. So before I launch into that, just a brief introduction to CALI lessons generally and why we're even talking about this today. CALI lessons are online, interactive legal tutorials on discrete areas of law. They are written and peer-reviewed by law school faculty, law librarians, and of course, as you saw earlier, folks from the academic success community. We have over 1,000 lessons across 40 different subject matter areas. And of course, faculty and students at CALI member law schools are already free to use all of these lessons without limitation. And that's great. We love the CALI lessons. However, what I'm going to be talking about today is taking and adapting these CALI lessons to your particular needs so that they're even more suitable for your course and your students. Now, while it would be fun to actually add bow ties and things, we can't actually dress up the CALI lessons, but what we can do is if you've determined that a CALI lesson is a pretty good fit, but you want to make some slight alterations to it and edit some of the text, you can do that. If you want to add full passages of material, whether it's elaborating on something that's already there or creating, entirely new content, you can do that. If you've decided that entire sections or pages or questions just do not work for you, you can remove them. If you have a good image or flowchart that you think would enhance the lesson, you could add it. If there's a video that pertains to the material that you'd like to include in the lesson, you can add that. Of course, CALI lessons are known for their interactivity, and so you can add new questions, modify the questions that are already there, and remove questions as you see fit. Now, some of you might already have experience with modifying CALI lessons, and those of you who do might say, well, what's the big deal? You've been able to do this all along. Well, the big deal is we've launched a new web-based version of CALI Author, which makes it even easier to modify the lessons in the CALI library. So this new version is available on the CALI website through your CALI account. There's no longer any software downloads required, which of course makes it now Windows and Mac compatible. It offers a more intuitive and streamlined authoring, revising, and publishing process, and it allows for easier collaboration with other authors. Of course, today I'm going to be focusing on the revision process as opposed to the authoring of a new lesson. And again, if you are at a CALI member law school, you can start doing this now. With a slight caveat, I added an asterisk here because in order to start working with the new web version of CALI Author, you will have to request and get access by filling out and completing the form at cali.org/CAW-beta. All right, moving forward, the topics that I'm going to be covering today are tips for evaluating CALI lessons to determine whether they might be a good fit for your course and what kind of changes might be necessary, making modifications to that CALI lesson, publishing your freshly modified CALI lesson for your students, creating a lesson link so it's just tied to your one set of students and one course, and of course, accessing the student score analytics after the students have run the lesson. With all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the CALI website to walk through how some of this is done. All right, so right now you should see the CALI website homepage. I'm going to assume that I've already requested and gained access to the online version of CALI Author. I'm also going to assume that I'm a faculty member logged in with a CALI account. All right. Also, for the purposes of this, I'm going to pretend like I'm teaching a civil procedure course, and I am looking for some asynchronous teaching material on the subject of specific jurisdiction. So I've perused the CALI website. I found that we have a subject on civil procedure, and I found a lesson that might be a good fit to assign to my students on the topic of specific jurisdiction. So I'm going to go ahead and access the lesson. Now I could go ahead and start the lesson and run through the lesson as a student would in order to evaluate whether or not it would be suitable for the course. But an easier way might be to access the faculty view. And again, you have to be logged in as a faculty member to access this view. By selecting the faculty view, it will open up a text-only version of the entire lesson. So of course, this allows you to do a control find for various search terms. You don't have to actually run through a question in order to see, whether or not it's been labeled as correct or incorrect and what the feedback tied to any particular question choice is. So that's just a good way to get a preliminary view of the entire lesson to determine whether or not it would be a good fit. I'm going to jump back to the lesson. So at this point, I've decided, all right, I'm at least interested in working with this lesson. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to access the CALI Author platform and do a little more digging. So again, I've already gained access to the platform by filling out the form through the link that I provided earlier. From my CALI dashboard, I'm going to select CALI Author. And now I'm at the CALI Author homepage. If I wanted to write a new lesson, I would select the button on the right, but today we're talking about revising existing CALI lessons in the CALI library. So I'm going to choose Lesson Library. From here, you'll see 4 tabs: My Lessons, Shared with Me, Community Library, and CALI Library. Because I'm working with an existing CALI lesson that's publicly available on the website, I'm going to choose the CALI Library tab. Now you will see a list of all publicly available CALI lessons, and I'm free to work with any one of them. So, as I mentioned before, I want to work with the lesson on specific jurisdiction. So I'm just going to go ahead and start typing that in the search box in the upper right, and you'll see that it pulled up Introduction to Specific Jurisdiction, the lesson that I am interested in. Now, if I want to do a little bit more digging and want a different view, I can go ahead and select the little eyeball here. And now I have pulled open a read-only version of the lesson within CALI Author. So while it looks like I can make changes, I assure you I cannot. And if I try to, it will tell me that the changes cannot be saved. So you can poke around the lesson. This is how it would look to an author. You can jump over to the student view. And again, just, get a good sense as to what might be necessary for the lesson. So I've done this and I've determined, okay, I want to assign this lesson, but I see a number of changes that I want to make in order to make it a really good fit for my course. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to exit the lesson. I'm going to re-enter the lesson library. I'm going to pull the lesson up again. I have to spell it right. All right. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Copy Lesson to My Library. Once I do that, it will open a copy of the lesson that is yours to do whatever you want with. So at this point, the default open is in the Author tab, and I'm going to start making changes. So I've decided in my evaluation that I just really don't like question 9. It doesn't work for me, whether for one reason or another. I'm going to go ahead and select that page from the table of contents to the left, and I'm going to delete it. It's that simple. Now, because I deleted question 9 and there's a question 10, I'm going to go ahead and select question 10, and I'm going to rename it question 9, so it makes more sense. I've also decided that on the topic of purposeful availment, I teach this just a little bit differently. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select that page, and I'm going to remove some of the text here. And I'm going to add what I want to add. Sara's brilliant thoughts on the matter. So now I've added my own material to the lesson. All right, so I've decided that I just don't have a need for the section, the need for statutory authority. So I'm going to go ahead and select the table of contents, which will pull up all of the section headings, and I'm going to delete it. Once I select Update Table of Contents, that section no longer appears in the lesson. I've also decided that at the end of the section, the 3 threads of due process, I would like to add a question. So I'm going to select the last page in that section. I'm going to choose add page. And this will give me all of the options of the different question and text page types that I can possibly add. So you'll see that there are various text pages, whether it's text only or text with medium. But in this particular instance, I would like to add a simple true or false question. So I'm going to choose multiple choice short. I'm going to add my question. Adds my question text. I'm going to change the buttons to true and false. I'm going to determine that the right answer is true and the incorrect answer is false. And I'm going to add my 2 choices. Oh, this is my feedback. I'm sorry. I'm going to add my feedback for a true answer and then the feedback for a false answer. Now you'll see if I flip over to the student view that I have my question, my true answer, and the feedback that results from a true response and the false. All right. So the last thing I want to do to the lesson before it's ready to go is I want to add an image. So I've decided that for the page on the problem of intermediaries, I have a really cool flow chart that I want to add. So I'm going to go ahead and flip back to the author tab. And I'm going to select the image tab from the toolbar at the top. And I'm going to go ahead and add an image from my desktop, aptly named flowchart. Send it to the server. You'll see that the image is now on the page. And if I flip over to the student view, I've now added an image. So at this point, I've decided these are all the changes that I want to make to a lesson. I've added a question. I've added some material to some of the pages. I've deleted a section. I've deleted a question. I'm going to go ahead and rename this page or this lesson, mostly so I can find it now, CALIcon example. And I'm going to save and exit to lessons home. Now, once you made that copy from the CALI library, you will find the copy of the lesson in your My Lessons list. So now you'll see at the very top is CALIcon example. That's the lesson we were just working with. And so I have a few different options to work with now. I can either go back and continue to edit the lesson. I can view a read-only version of the lesson. I can make another copy. I can publish the lesson, but let's say I want to collaborate with one of my colleagues on the lesson. So in this instance, I want to give editing access to my colleague, Deb. There can only be one editor at a time. So I'm going to remove myself and I'm going to add Deb as the editor. And in order for the change to take effect, I'm also going to add her as a reader. I'm going to select OK. Now you'll notice that I'm still the owner of the lesson because the lesson originated with me. So I will always have the heart. And Deb is now the editor, which is indicated by the little pencil. Now, if I want to just add her as a reader, I can keep myself as the editor, which means I would be the only one who can make changes. But Deb is now added as a reader. So when she goes into her shared with me tab, she will find this lesson and she will be able to access a read-only version of the lesson and will not be able to make any changes. So this is a really easy way, instead of having to attach files and send it back and forth and worry about copies that aren't the most recent copy. You can pass the lesson back and forth really easily just by altering these different permission settings within lesson properties. All right, so Deb and I have gone back and forth. We've decided the lesson is ready to publish. I'm going to go ahead and publish my lesson on www.cali.org. And here's my lesson. All of the changes I've made have taken effect on this lesson. I can run it. And of course, you can give this particular URL to the student in order to run the lesson, but we highly encourage you to create a lesson link. And the reason we highly encourage you to create a lesson link for every single one of the lessons that you assign is because if you decide that you want to teach this particular, if you want to use this lesson over multiple semesters, or over multiple courses, even in one semester, you don't want all the student data and the student analytics lumped into one giant data set. You want it separated out by each individual course and to limit the data for a particular course into one data set. So I'm going to go ahead and create a lesson link for my new modified lesson. I'm going to go to my CALI dashboard, choose lesson link from the menu, and I'm going to create a new lesson link. This is assuming that I want to create a brand new course. I'm going to name it CALIcon example. That is the name of the course. I'm going to keep semester as summer 2021. And when I go to select a topic, I'm not going to be tempted to choose civil procedure. I'm going to scroll all the way down to your CALI library resources, at which point you will see the entire list of all the self-published lessons and quiz-write quizzes that you have in your library. So as you recall, the lesson that I created was called CALIcon example. I'm going to select that. Now I can select multiple courses as well if you want to assign multiple lesson links for a single course. But I'm going to just choose the one lesson that we created, that we modified today, create the lesson link. And now you'll notice that I'm on the lesson link page. If I go back to my lesson link home, which I'm taking the long way, you'll see that I now have two different courses here, but this is the one that I just created, CALIcon example. I can view the lesson links for the course. So this is the link that I would assign to students so they run the course, and so I can access the analytics for just this lesson link and just this course. If I had multiple lesson links, I would give them the URL for this page so they would have a landing page to all the different lesson links. All right, now let's say that I have assigned the lesson through a lesson link. All the students have accessed the lesson through said lesson link. And now I have analytics to look at. I asked my colleagues in advance to run this lesson separately. So here's the same lesson run by my colleagues. I can access the grades. So here are all the students who ran the lesson. Here's the saved grade, the number of answered, the number of correct out of the total, the lesson date. But what I really want to look at are the detailed lesson link analytics for this lesson. By accessing the lesson links, I can see so many things. So the first thing is it's broken down by student at the top. So you can see that Jennifer Chan got 50% correct. Jessica got 67% of the questions she answered correct. Sam got 57% of the questions answered correct. So you can see just the student scores at the top. If you scroll down, you'll see the analytics broken down by individual question. So here you can see that question 1, 88% of students who ran the lesson got question 1 correct. 75% of students who ran question 3 got question 3 correct. Now you can drill down even deeper by choosing include response breakdown. By doing that, you can see the distribution of the different answers for every single question. So here you can see that 6 students got question 3 right by answering with response A. You can see that the 2 people who got this question wrong, one of them chose B and one of them chose D. Moving down, you can see that 5 people got this question right by answering D, 2 people got it wrong by answering C, and 1 person got it wrong by answering A. Now, this really gives you some insight into where students might be going wrong. If you see, for instance, that every student who got the answer wrong answered D, you might want to follow up on why do all the students think that D is the correct answer. You also see which questions people might be struggling with, right? So if you scroll down and see, oh man, only 20% of students got introductory question 1 right, that might give you some sort of insight into how you want to follow with the students. Further, you can drill down even deeper by choosing list students for each response. Now I can see how every single student in the class responded. So I can see all the students who selected C in order to get question 1 right, all the students who selected response choice A in order to get question 3 right, and for those who got it wrong, what they selected as the wrong answer. So again, it gives you a really personalized, in-depth view into what students might be struggling with regards to the material. So that is how you identify which CALI lessons might be fit for your course, how you actually make the modifications, and how you create a lesson link and assign it to students and then ultimately access the student analytics. This is my contact information. If you have any questions now or later, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks.
Fantastic. Wow, that was the fastest I've seen anybody go through talking about CALI author ever. You beat even my record on that. Thank you very much. We're going to hold questions till the end. we determined that with the overflow from the last session and the amount that we wanted to get in on this session, that Elmer's 15 minutes have been taken away. He's no longer going to get his 15 minutes of fame. But what we'll do is we do want to talk about the new features that we've done to the CALI website. So we're going to have some webinars throughout the spring and summer, talking about a lot of the new things, and maybe even dive deeper on what Sara's done, because there's a lot to unpack there on creating your own teaching materials, interactive teaching materials yourself. All right, our next group of speakers is Sally Wise of the University of Miami School of Law, retired. Kristina Niedringhaus of Georgia State University College of Law, and Tawnya Plumb of the University of Wyoming College of Law. And they were our guinea pigs on this CALI author system. I mean, we built the system not just for faculty to do work, but for us to internally manage and control our 1,000 lessons, production updates, revisions, and also when as we go forward with fellowships and large revision projects, have a place where everything can be organized. And their talk is on modernizing and improving access to the legal research lessons, 6 months with the CALI Fellows. So I'll let you folks take it away. Sally, I think you're on mute.
Another thing. Okay, so here we go. The three of us, and Tanya's somewhere. So modernizing. Here, I'm just doing the intro, and then Tawnya and Chris are going to talk about specifically students and faculty. So this was the press release that we were starting, and we're going to be 6 months as fellows. And the idea is the Legal Research Revision Fellowship. So we're going to revise around 70 lessons, and there's 7 of us, so there's 10 of us. And we've been doing what Sara just showed us. And we're trying to update and reflect, new teaching pedagogy. So that's what we were up to. The CALI lessons are used hundreds of thousands of times. And so this was a great idea to work with them. And so here are the fellows. And so I'll start at the top, and this is Tawnya Plumb, and on the left, and you will see her soon. Beth Edelman on the middle, and then Beth DeFleece on the right, going back down to the bottom. Chris Niedringhaus, Mary Rumsey, and Sean Esposito, and me. So here are the group of fellows, and we worked together on Slack. We had monthly office hours, and we then had actually monthly 5-hour sessions to talk about all different things. CALI, and also to talk specifically sometimes about, again, what Sara was showing. And Sara and Deb were our leaders and cheerleaders. And here's pictures of the CALI staff, and you can see here's Deb and Sara, our leaders and cheerleaders. Elmer got in on the picture, so did John, and you've already heard about Sam. And so we had meetings with Sam too. So it has been a delightful and very interesting working with all these different, legal research lessons. And some of them I had no idea that CALI even had. And some of them were working, have been there for years and years. So it's really been fun learning just about the lessons. So you may be asking, when were these being released? And some of them are already now on the website. And you'll see here the top image is the CALI landing page, and you'll see a link to updated lessons. And so this is a page you will see, and you'll see on May 26th, one decision point, state or federal, has been released, and a number of them have already been released. They go through a real process. We have peer review, then we have staff review with Deb and Sara, and both of them are very good at being students, because obviously these are focused on students, and so they'll put on student hats and say, I think students might be a little confused at this point. So it's all of us, I think, have been a really great team, and it's really been fun and interesting to really go through this whole process. And so with that, I'm going to end my time, and Tanya's next.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Sally. And it's been an honor to be a part of this fellowship, and there's been great energy. Of course, anybody that's worked with the CALI staff knows how fantastic they are, and it's a great experience. With my minutes with you today, I want to talk about the findability and discoverability of CALI lessons. So the librarians set out to revise the lessons, but in the process, we tend to like to organize things, right? So when opportunities arose, when we found that a lesson wasn't easily findable, we started having conversations with the very patient CALI staff on what can we do? What can we do to make these lessons more findable? And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and take you on a ride through some pages on our CALI webpage. All right, can y'all see my screen okay?
No, we're seeing your desktop, but not the presentation.
Oh, you think all of this time later we would have this figured out? We'll try it one more time.
All right, we see the PowerPoint, but not the slideshow.
Thanks for your patience. Okay, so here we are at the CALI website, and there's a few different places that you may already be going to find your CALI lessons. You might be going to the search function, you might be going through the drop down under lessons and browsing lessons or referring to the subject outlines. And the fellowship has impacted all of these locations. So I'm going to start off with the search option. We realized that some lessons were not easily findable by title. So if we typed in a lesson like agency decisions and orders, I'm sorry, let me back up. If we typed in the word administrative law, we wouldn't find the lesson on agency decisions and orders, at least not on this initial search screen. So in our discussions, we started talking about, okay, which are the lessons that might need additional words added to them to ensure that they'll be findable. So that's an example where we would add perhaps administrative to the title somewhere, or in lessons that might not have research specifically mentioned, we might add research to the title as well. So in the future, you might see familiar lessons with slightly altered titles, and that is why. And those will all be reflected just within that searching interface. The other two places would be the browse all lessons, and then the subject outlines. And before I go and show you what's new there, I want to just have you think for a moment about what you would do if you were in a group of 7 people plus a couple grade excellent CALI staff, and what you would do and how you would go about organizing a conversation around let's group 70 lessons, let's reorganize them and regroup them. What would that look like? How would you visualize that? If you were brilliant, as our Sara is, you would have thought to use a tool like Trello to base our conversation on. So what did we do? Sara started off with broad categories here. You got research techniques, and then primary law, and then secondary resources, and then specific secondary resources, and then at the end, non-US jurisdictions. So Sara got us started with a rough outline. And then with time and a conversation, she just moved the boxes for us. You know, we really think that this particular lesson would be better off within the specific topics column, for instance, rather than just secondary sources. And over the course of 2 hours, which I think is really impressive, I can imagine a lot of groups doing this and we would not be nearly that efficient. So it was really great working with these fellows. We created a new structure to how CALI lessons are organized. Going a little bit closer, taking a zoom in view, you might notice that we also added a couple of additional tagging options for introductory or advanced lessons. So as we were discussing, we wanted a way to group introductory lessons within, say, primary law before advanced lessons within primary law. And this would be good for faculty to help faculty know, you know, do you assign this to a 1L or would this be something you would assign to a 2 or a 3L? And so we created these tags within this Trello system that affects the impact of how these are displayed on the CALI website. So returning to the CALI website, if you click on lessons and then browse all lessons and then legal research, before the results would be alphabetical by title. Now what you're seeing are that these lessons are ordered by the structure of that Trello reorganization. So in this case, we're starting with those broad research skills first. And then as you would scroll down or click on subsequent pages, you would be taken to primary research, secondary research, and non-US jurisdictions. And then those state-specific CALI lessons that used to be intermixed alphabetically, those are now available at the end, still in alphabetical form, but they kind of end up at the end of the list. So this is what you see within the browse all lessons. And cheers to CALI for staff for getting this up so quickly. We just finished this project less than 2 weeks ago, and they got it up and running, and the new order is there. One thing we talked about that's a consideration for the future is whether or not we can add a new layer of tagging underneath, so to speak, legal research. So these would be tags that would quickly get a faculty member from legal research to, say, introductory statutes research or advanced statute research. That's something we're still in conversations with CALI staff, but that might be something that you see in the future. If you want to see a version of Trello, that Trello layout that we created, if you just click on subject outlines now on the CALI website, that full structure is available for viewing. And again, the end goal of this is to make these revised lessons more findable. And I hope that on behalf of the fellowship that we did that. In that, I will close and I will turn it over to Chris.
Hi, everyone. I am going to talk to you all about the students, and I don't have slides, so we're going to stare at Tawnya for this presentation. But I am going to talk to you about how we thought about the lessons from the standpoint of the students. And it seemed like every conversation that we had came back to everyone wanting to make sure that the lessons were the best for the students and would provide the students with the most benefit. So as I go through and talk about some of the issues that we discussed, think about that from the perspective of a student. So some of the issues that we looked at, and so just to reiterate what Sally had said, the process was that each of the fellows would pick different lessons. And the first step would be that that fellow would go through and review the lesson and make any revisions that they thought were appropriate. Then the lesson would be sent to a peer reviewer. So another fellow would go through, look at the lesson, suggest changes. It would come back to the original person. Then it goes to staff review, and then it goes to proofreading. So there's 2 fellows and 2 opportunities for CALI staff to look at each of the lessons. And some of the things that we talked about wanting to pay attention to were length. So we all know how hard it is to stare at a computer screen for an hour or 45 minutes, or really our attention span has gotten much smaller. And so this has always been an issue that we've tried to look at with CALI lessons, but it's something that we looked at. And if there are ways for us to make the lesson shorter while still having the substance that it needed to have. The findability that Tawnya talked about is also important for the students. So some students, the way they use CALI lessons is they just do whatever their faculty assign them to. But other students, or they may use them that way and then discover CALI lessons and want to go find lessons on their own. And so that reorganization that Tawnya talked about is very important for the students as well. Some other issues that we worked on were hypotheticals, making sure that the hypotheticals worked that were already there, and thinking about if there were other hypos, even if they're just short examples or short things that the students could work through. That seems to be more engaging for the students in the lessons. So we thought about that. We also thought about the images and the visual layout in the lesson to make them more readable on the screen. So not just from the standpoint of updating the screenshots, which we obviously did. If there were substantive images that we needed to update, we did that, but also just thinking about how interesting is the page, how readable is it? Is this a really dense page that students are gonna have to wade through, or can we break it up a little bit and make it more interesting for them? We also thought about trying to make the lessons more inclusive from a number of different standpoints. We talked, I think Deb and Sara probably got tired of us asking, is this usable with a screen reader, or how is this going to work with a screen reader? But we also thought about things like the names of the people in the lessons, and the images that we used, and gender roles in the lessons and in the hypotheticals. So trying to keep those things in the back of our mind and pay attention to them. And of course, there's always more work to be done, but I think that we've made some progress there. And then maybe most importantly, for every lesson, there will now be learning objectives on the first page. So I think that's good for both faculty thinking about assigning a lesson, but it's also good for the students to be able to look and see immediately, here's what I'm gonna learn from this lesson, and make that decision, is this something that I should go through, or should I look for a different lesson that more closely meets my needs? So the learning objectives are a big thing, and I think they're a great addition to the lessons, and hopefully you all will agree with that. And then I talked earlier about the length of the lessons. And so one of the things that we discussed as a group was removing some of the librarian information in the lessons. We are librarians. We think all of this about research, everything about research and information sources is fascinating, but the students are not librarians. And so when we thought a lesson was long, or it just helped with the flow of a lesson, sometimes we took out material that we thought was more librarian material and was not really necessary for the students to know or understand in order to properly do research on the particular topic. So that was one thing that we did to try and reduce length and just make the flow better. And then just as an overarching way, the whole point is to bring the lessons up to date, right? So some CALI lessons have been revised very recently. They weren't as out of date. Other lessons had not been touched for a number of years. And so obviously those need to be updated. My favorite example that I've done recently was I worked on the government documents lesson, and great lesson. There were a lot of good hypos and great information. But to give you an idea of how long it had been since it had been touched, it talked about the government printing office. So I had to go through and change government printing office to government publishing office. And then the focus was mostly on print materials. And so I went through and updated that, included more electronic resources, didn't get rid of all the print, got rid of some of it to make room for the electronic materials. But those are the types of decisions that we were making as we were going through the lessons. And I think that it's really important. It was really helpful to us as fellows to have another fellow look at it, because we all teach a little bit differently, or maybe we have access to different resources. So that was very helpful. And then those office hours that we would do every few weeks, and those 5-hour Saturday meetings, it was a really good opportunity for all of us to talk together and ask questions. How do you teach this? What do you use? And I think that in the end, hopefully you all will agree. I think we're going to see a good improvement in the legal research lessons and your ability to find them and use them in your classes. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you very much. We're pretty close to our time. In case people are going to jump out because we're at the question and answer phase, I'm going to hit enter on something I've just put in the chat. We've discovered that we might have sent some bad links out for the next session, the sponsor session, or for the 3 o'clock session. And so if you want to use those links, they'll get you into the correct sessions, Elmer tells me. What would a technical conference be without technical problems? A couple of questions. So you guys were our guinea pigs also for CALI Author. How was that experience? And I realize I'm tossing a grenade here. You think it's something that your average faculty member could pick up with some training, with some orientation to modify an existing CALI lesson?
So I've written, man, I'm actually embarrassed to say how long I've been working with CALI on writing and editing CALI lessons. It is so much better than the software version. I do think that the web version is a lot easier to use, which is not to say that there might be places where you have questions, but I do feel like or maybe I'm running my personal contest to see who can put in the most help tickets for CALI Author. And so far, I think I'm ahead. So we are kicking the tires on it, but I definitely would encourage people to take advantage of their ability to edit the lessons. I do think it's fairly intuitive, and where it's not intuitive or you get confused, help is not far away virtually and is very rapid in coming. So I think people should play with it a little bit, and I think you'll be excited about the possibilities.
Our goal was always to be to give agency to faculty. I like the idea that you could put your own voice, even if you disagree with an answer or a question. You could put your DVD commentary version inside of a lesson and say, although the author of the lesson says this, in our class we're thinking of it this way. Because sometimes having someone to react to is a teachable moment, I guess.
I'll just add, I agree with Chris. I hadn't really used the software, and so I just kind of jumped into CALI Author, and I found I was able to, figure it out. And generally, I mean, Sara and Deb were there, you know, to get us started and help. But yes, I think, you know, with some information, yeah, I think it is. And it's fun too, because you're then seeing, you know, your viewpoint, you know, reflected in the lesson too. So yes, I would definitely encourage people to do it. And Sara just, well, 15 minutes was a little fast, but she gave a really good overview.
I'll ask the same question that I asked the law school success people. Teaching legal research is hard, and I know the advantage of using CALI lessons is its interactivity. You can give a hypo and things, but would it be as good or better or supplemental if we did these as like screencasts, sort of like what our keynote speaker demonstrated, super simple videos, you know, in 5 minutes, let me show you how to do this particular research topic or something.
I could see that being very helpful. There are, within the CALI author interface now, there's an ability to add a video. And I think some of us have discussed, well, if we want to show a transition and show somebody how to walk through the research steps using a particular website, we could record a video, right? And then put it in the CALI lesson. What you'd be doing there, John, would be just making it easier for us, right? And I think that's a great idea. And I suspect you'd have many previous and future authors willing to help you out with that.
But
Neat.
I agree with that 100%. I think it's important to keep in mind that they would probably have to be updated fairly frequently because, for example, if you're doing a screencast, like if you're showing a commercial vendor or something, they change their platforms so frequently. So some of them would age pretty well, but some of them would need a faster redo rate probably. But I'd love somebody to help me do a video like that. That was very snazzy, much better than what I do on my own. So.
And I think Michael Wesch even said you don't have to put your own face in it. You could just have the voice version. And we're, you know, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we're looking at a way to allow faculty to drop not the authors, but the instructors to basically drop chunks of video into lessons as sort of like a pop-up video to appear in a question as a sort of a faster way to add their own instructor viewpoint while the student is running through a lesson. But that's a topic for another day.
John, I think it would also be useful if you could, as you're thinking through that, have a way for the students to do the video, the students to show other students how they, you know, did the research, because they really learn from each other as well. So it'd be nice to think about the student angle also.
Yep, excellent. Yes. You know, I know Michael even talked about the idea of students doing videos as part of their class projects that they would then share with others. So the instructor doesn't have to grade them. You know, you use the students to peer review the students, and they learn both by the doing and by the viewing of other people's work. Well, great. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation. We're done for this session, and now we're going to move on to the sponsor session. There'll be a short break. And see you all in that next session, in that break.